people always want to point out how you're different, and the way to like get around that for yourself is to like find out where you belong, I guess. And so I think I've always been searching for that, and I just didn't quite know how to articulate it or fully understand it for myself until recently.
Welcome to episode 5 of the Multiracialverse podcast. On today's empowering episode, we're joined by Gabriella Weiss, a trailblazing isotope chemist at NASA. Born to a Mexican mother and European Jewish father, Gabriella's multicultural journey fuels her exploration of molecular mysteries. Raised in Salinas until she was 13, she's become a scientific force, unraveling clues about our solar system's history, and now hoping to find life's beginnings in the interior of icebergs. Beyond her groundbreaking work, Gabriella is a beacon of inspiration for young girls, particularly Latinx and women in the male-dominated realms of space. Join us as we delve into her extraordinary career, dedication to education, love of nature, and the importance of shattering barriers for future generations. This conversation is full of insights and laughs and reminds time and time again that we are all connected like other complex systems in the natural world. And if we take time to stop and listen to one another, we realize that we are all very similar and connected. Beautiful relationships will spring forth effortlessly the way they should in this big, mysterious, and ever-expanding multiracial verse we live in. Hello, Gabriella. Welcome to the Multiracial Verse. How you doing today?
I'm great. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time out today to talk about your diverse heritage and the cool work that you do, and just about your journey to where you're at now. So to get the listeners grounded, let's share some of your background.
All right. So I was born and raised in California, and both of my parents were also born and raised in California. My dad is a Jewish man who grew up in the Bay Area, and my mom is a Mexican woman who grew up on the border in the Imperial Valley. So the dry, deserty farmland part of California, and they met in San Diego and then moved up to the Central Valley, Bay Area part of California where I was born. So I was raised in a household that embraced the Jewish culture and also Mexican Catholic culture. And my dad doesn't speak Spanish, so the primary language in our house was English. I did learn some Spanish as a kid, but it wasn't until later in life that I really started to learn more Spanish, and it's an ongoing journey for me still.
That's interesting. What did that look like? A Jewish and Catholic household. What did family traditions, or what did that look like growing up?
So we were raised Catholic. My mom kind of took control of the cultural, religious side of things. And that was like the primary influence, I guess. But we also really embraced the Jewish culture. And so we would celebrate Jewish holidays as well. But I never went to any like religious schools for Judaism. And I didn't learn any Hebrew. And it was often brought to my attention that I wasn't actually Jewish because my mom isn't Jewish. So there was that dynamic at play there. But in our house specifically, both sides of things were embraced. And I definitely felt like there was a lean towards the Mexican Catholic side of things just because my mom felt more religious at the time when we were growing up than my dad did. But she never like talked down about Judaism, and there wasn't any like weird dynamics in the like negative space there. Both sides of my heritage were embraced in our household.
And the children will tend to learn the language. Is that you say that's not the case with you? Did she speak Spanish at home, or?
So she tells this story that when I was really young, I told her I didn't want to speak Spanish. So she spoke to me in Spanish when I was really young. And there was also a woman who took care of me who spoke to me in Spanish. So I think some of my first words were in Spanish. But at a certain point, I guess, I don't remember saying this, so I can't provide much context to what I was thinking at the time. But apparently I told her I didn't want to learn Spanish. And I think it was probably easy for her to just speak in English, given that my dad speaks English. But there's always been some words that we've said in Spanish, and now that I'm older and more interested in speaking the language, we try to speak in Spanish more often now. But it is a little bit weird, given that most of my life we interacted in English, so we tend to fall back to that. But I think we both recognize that it's an important part of like our identity and our heritage too. So I think we're working on it, but yeah, That's awesome. It was definitely predominantly English growing up.
So in like grade school, you say you grew up on the central coast, was it? Or
yeah, in Salinas, California.
Oh, right on. Okay, so yeah, I mean, most people, if they know the area, know that demographically it's got a high population of Latinx, Hispanic, Mexican people. Did you feel like you just fit in with the kids at the school, or did you have instances of like the kid, one of the things that comes up with individuals who are mixed, especially, well, actually probably across the whole, I don't want to generalize too much, but is that, you might not be enough of something. So were there ever those instances, growing up that kids might have said, oh, you're not really Mexican because your dad's white, or, can you share any of those that you might remember?
I've wondered about that in the like motivation for me saying I didn't want to speak Spanish. I don't really remember any specific examples of that in elementary school. I think, so I lived in Salinas until I was 13, and then we moved to Southern California after that. So I lived in a place called Corona, California, which is in the Inland Empire, like southeast of Los Angeles. So both of those places were pretty predominantly Latinx communities. So I didn't really stand out so much there, I didn't think. But I think as I was older, people kind of questioned more like, oh, so you're Jewish, your dad's Jewish, your mom's Mexican, you're Catholic. Like people had questions about that. And it was just kind of like, yeah, that's what I am, I guess. I think I definitely felt the like when I was younger and we went to see my mom's family and there were a lot of older family members who only spoke Spanish, then I felt like, oh, I couldn't speak Spanish. I was too shy. I couldn't really communicate with some people. So I didn't feel like I was really part of that aspect of my culture, I guess. And then anytime we went to like temple services for like with my grandmother on my dad's side of the family, things would be in Hebrew, and I had no idea what was going on there. And then it was like always emphasized to me that like we weren't Jewish, and so like I definitely felt like I didn't belong in either community, and I was just kind of stuck in between and like trying to be like, well, that's what I am, so I don't know what to tell you. And I think that through line has kind of carried throughout my life of like, I don't know what to tell you, this is what I am.
What did your community look like then? Like, what did who did you gravitate to as far as friends and things like that throughout school?
It's harder for me to remember elementary school, but definitely in middle school and high school, I had a lot more Mexican or Latin American friends. And then I think I had a lot more friends of non-white background than I did of white backgrounds. But I did have friends who were white as well. I felt like in high school especially, I had a pretty diverse group of friends, and I like didn't even think twice about it. I guess I really took it for granted that I grew up in a place that was pretty diverse. It wasn't until I left California that I realized how maybe lucky, or I don't know if that's the right word to use, but how my experience was different than in a lot of other places. But I think I always felt, consciously or not, I always felt a connection or a stronger connection to people who didn't have 100% white background. And I think as I've come to try to understand myself and my identities more as an adult, I think it was related to searching for some sense of belonging, some sense of understanding, some sense of comfort, because people always want to point out how you're different. And the way to like get around that for yourself is to like find out where you belong, I guess. And so I think I've always been searching for that, and I just didn't quite know how to articulate it or fully understand it for myself until recently.
Jumping ahead a little bit, what did that journey to where you belong, what are some of the things that you've done that have helped you find places where you feel more comfortable or where you feel like you belong? Because I think that's one of the things we want to do here is create a community of whether it's people who are mixed race, biracial, and find that community where they're like, oh yeah, I can, that's familiar. But there's also a piece I'm going to bring in is which will be like the allies, which would be like our totally white friends or like our 100% white friends, that hopefully we'll be able to give them some insight into, oh, you have a mixed friend. They might be thinking about this, or, we never really talked about it. And part of it is, we're putting this on the table as, looking at categories, maybe looking at the different sides. But what have you done? And it's a long way to get to what have you done to find those spaces where you feel comfortable, and you're starting to feel like, this is where I belong.
Yeah, I think it's hard to think of like tangible things or actions that I did in a lot of instances, because I just found myself gravitating towards people who had similar backgrounds in one way or another. I did my master's and my PhD in Europe, and my master's was in Northern Ireland and my PhD was in the Netherlands. So those are very white and homogenous countries. And I think it wasn't, I experienced this before then for sure, but it wasn't like as constant part of my daily life as it was when I lived in Europe, that I stood out. I really looked different. And people point that out all the time. And, why do you talk like this? Why do you look like this? Why is your hair like that? Why is your skin color like this? And I definitely thought about those things before, but just, not as regularly as I did when I was in Europe. And so that added to this level of discomfort. And so I just ended up finding people who I identified with and could foster that sense of comfort, and I didn't have to explain myself to. So it was sort of a unconscious or subconscious, I always get those words mixed up, but it wasn't like an actively intentional thing that I was doing, I think, until maybe the last few years when I really actively started to talk about my experiences more with people and search for people who have similar experiences, and joining the Just Be Social Club was one way that I was looking to connect with more people who have different identities or similar identities to me. And so it's becoming more of a conscious thing that I'm looking for now. But I think an important aspect of all of this that's been present throughout is just talking about it and then sharing my experiences and saying things like, it doesn't always feel comfortable when people are questioning why you are the way you are in terms of like your physical characteristics that you can't really change, right? And I'm someone who can more easily blend in to different cultures, and that's been really an advantage to me in traveling as a solo female.
Privilege.
Yeah. Right, exactly. Yeah. And so I recognize that my experience is very different than other people's, but there have also been times where I've been singled out because of how I look. So I've seen both sides of it.
Yeah. Did you ever feel like you were hiding and now you like don't have to hide anymore? And if you have felt like, oh, I'm hiding and I've never really thought about it that way,
why do you think you felt like you needed to hide? And maybe that's just part of code switching and slithering in between, not using a snake maybe, because snakes,
I like the snake.
and moving, tightrope walking. Yeah. Did you feel like you were hiding, and now it's okay to expose these two sides of yourself, or to say, hey, I'm mixed, and like,
yeah, definitely. I think like using my time in Europe as another example, I would say like, oh, I'm Californian. That was my explanation. And then people would be like, yeah, but where's your family really from? Or where are you really from? And they would probe further, but I would be like, I'm just an American, like that's it. And so I think I was definitely trying to hide then, and just kind of like, let's not make this the center of our conversation. And, perhaps people were making an effort to try to get to know me in those moments. It didn't always feel that way. It felt more like, I don't understand you and I need to put you in some sort of box so that I know how to interact with you. But I should also give people the benefit of the doubt, right? So they're trying to learn about me, and I was shutting that down in those instances. But I definitely feel like it's something I'm embracing now, and it's something that I'm proud of, and it's an important part of me, and it is a huge part of how I've navigated the world and how I continue to navigate the world. And so like that context is really important for myself, but also for other people.
Yeah. So taking a step back, something that I was thinking about is your mom being a Latinx female. And a lot of this is either talking about, the stereotypes that might exist, or other things. And so how do you feel, or what do you feel that you learned from her personality wise, because she was a Latinx female? Like, what are the traits that you felt growing up in that household? And equally, what were the traits, from your father that you gained? And were there synergies across that you're like, oh wait, like growing up in these two households, even though they might be the exact opposite in religions and other things, there was a lot of similarities in just the humanness of it all.
Yeah, that's a interesting question. I think that something that my mom was very like upfront with her culture, and like food is a very central aspect of that. And she was the primary chef in the house. My father also cooked, but my mom, I feel like, took care of a lot of it. And, growing up with beans and rice, and like anytime we went to go to the movies or a baseball game, she would always pack bean burritos to take for us to eat. And I think there was a part of my life where that was embarrassing. And then, there's a part of my life where I was like, this is my culture. And so I think like, and my mom is a very outgoing person. She'll talk to anybody in the grocery store. And that was also something that we were always embarrassed about. But I was talking to someone earlier today about how I think that having conversations with people and communicating with people is something that I feel like is one of my strengths and something that I value a lot. And I don't think I always connected it to my mom and how she like makes connections with people and has conversations with anybody, and she can have a conversation with anybody. And I think we approach it in very different ways, but I'm sure I picked that up from her. And I think that like my dad is a little more reserved and quieter than my mom overall. And he can be a sensitive person in a lot of ways. And so I think I picked up some emotional sensitivities from him and a more reserved, quiet side from him. And I think he sort of fluctuated in his, I don't know if pride is the right word. For his Jewish heritage, I think like he has been, or maybe he like fluctuated in his spirituality. So there were times where it seemed like he was more connected to that than other times. And I think I've probably had a similar trajectory with my engagement with both sides of my identity, or, the many sides of my identity.
Yeah.
So I think I picked up those things from him. I definitely feel like I'm a mix of my parents in a lot of ways, and then I took that and ran off in a weird direction. So,
does your father, is his family from Eastern European background, and historically did he talk to you about the history of your family, and are there ties back to those times around World War II and other times like that?
Yeah, I don't really know the history of his family that well, and I'm not sure how well he knows it either. My grandma was born in San Francisco in 1930, so that immediate part of my family was in the U.S. during the Second World War. But I'm sure we've had family members that were in Europe and were affected by the Holocaust and things like that. There was some idea that we had family in Spain, but it's been hard to trace that back. And I think my dad and my grandma have done the genetic testing or whatever, and it's just kind of this blob in Eastern Europe. So it's unclear where we're actually from. And our last name is Weiss, so it's kind of a generic German, maybe Hungarian last name, so it's hard to trace it back from that alone. So that part is a little bit less clear, I guess. And I don't feel like my dad talked as much about his family growing up.
Was there any pressure growing up to conform traditionally to either of your parents' cultures in a way that's oh, hey, you have to, become X as far as your profession, or you have to get married at this time or in this way, or meet this type of partner? What did that look like growing up to you? And did you say you have siblings? I apologize, I might have missed that.
I don't know if we talked about it, but I have a younger brother.
Okay. So with you, what did that look like tradition wise, as you became an adult, and you were looking at schools or professions or other things? Were your parents, did they nurture your passions or your drive to be what you wanted to be, or was there no, you have to do this?
I think they tried their best to let me do what I wanted to do within some constraints. So it was I had to go to college, and I had to get a well-paying job, whatever that might be. I remember, so I started out my undergraduate, I went to community college. I thought I was going to do business school, which quickly evaporated. And then I got very interested in anthropology. So my undergraduate degree is in anthropology and religious studies. And then that's a hard field to find a job in. So I took some time off. And when I was ready to go back to school to do my master's, I was looking at archaeology, but from a more science perspective. So that's where I got into things like radiocarbon dating. So how we understand how old archaeological sites are and other parts of the environment. And I was going to take out a loan to do these studies because I didn't realize that STEM fields in the US and abroad, you can get funded to do these kinds of studies. So I had no idea. Nobody told me about that. And there was a lot of resistance from my dad, especially in taking out a loan and to pursue something that I felt like I was finally passionate about. So I think, they tried their best to be supportive, but there were some instances where it felt like they weren't supportive. And I think back on that a lot in terms of where I'm at now. And if I didn't take that step and take out that loan to do this degree, and I'm still paying off this loan now, will I ever pay it off, right? But I've been able to find some success in this field or this career trajectory. So it's kind of, for me, been a balance of those two things. But I think, there was pressure to not do it that way and to not get into debt and things like that, in which it's a reasonable thing to try to avoid, right? But like,
yeah, for sure. What did your parents, did they go to school also? College?
Yeah, both of my parents went to college. They were elementary school teachers. My dad did title insurance for a while, and then he switched to be a teacher when I was in elementary school. So I grew up around educators. Almost everyone in my family is some form of educator. So education is a big emphasis. And my parents also went to community college, so they spoke positively about that option. There was a lot of emphasis. My brother is very intelligent, and he skipped a couple of grades, and so there was a lot of emphasis on him going to college directly. And I think I didn't get as much of that support in, like, you know, I have to take the SATs or whatever. Like people were talking about those things, but I was resistant to it because I was trying to make my own way as a teenager, you know, but there wasn't that like emphasis or support on that end of things. And it was like, okay, I'm just going to community college. And then that was like, okay, that was what I was doing. Right. And so, there were some of the dynamics like that, you know, maybe if I was pushed harder, I would have resisted harder. So like, I think they just kind of let me do my thing, but it was always, it was like a given that I had to go to university in one way or another.
With your interest in science, where did that come from? And were either of your parents' cultures, did you feel like that passion for nature and for curiosity was nurtured by one of the other cultures?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that I always really liked science. So growing up in Salinas, we went to the Monterey Bay Aquarium all the time, and I loved it. I wanted to be a marine biologist. I was just so fascinated by it. And when I was in high school, I didn't do very well in biology. I was in like an honors biology class, and the teacher was one of those teachers that's like proud of the fact that no one gets 100% on their tests. And I really struggle with those kinds of teachers, because to me, it feels like you're not doing your job as a teacher. You know, not everyone's going to walk through the door of your classroom and immediately understand the subject matter and be able to like get 100% on an exam. You have to do some teaching to get us there, right? And so I really struggled in that class, and I didn't do well. And so I kind of just gave up on science, I guess, because of that. I was really discouraged by conversations with the teacher. And I remember we had a meeting with my parents and the teacher, and it just, that kind of like pushed me off of that track. And after I graduated from college with an anthropology and religious studies degree, I just, you know, we talked a lot about science and the environment in a lot of the classes that I took, but it wasn't the like focus, I guess. And so it was something that I was like, you know, maybe there's a way that I could tie my love for the environment into this degree that I did before. And that led me to the master's program I did in archaeology. But I'm not sure how much of it was really influenced directly by the culture in my household. I mean, growing up in California, you're very lucky to be surrounded by a very beautiful nature, and you can go hiking in the mountains and go to the beach and engage with a lot of different, and go to the desert. So there's so many different landscapes that you can engage with and appreciate. And my parents did foster that part of things. So there was some influence from them. But I think something that really also brought about this connection or intrigue with science was studying Mesoamerican cultures and how they engaged with the environment and science. And that was really interesting and inspiring to me. And I think I felt a connection to that. And I can relate that to my heritage in some ways. So it was maybe more of an indirect relationship to the culture rather than direct, I guess.
And did you have any introduction in college at all to, you know, clubs or other events or programs that kind of maybe pushed along, hey, wait a second, like I want to explore, this background, my Jewish background or my Mexican background a little bit more. There's like this club over here that I can join. Or were there any instances while you were going through college that might have helped also, nurture that and push that along?
So I did a minor in religious studies, and I took a lot of courses about Judaism. So that was where I was seeking to learn more about that side of my identity, I guess. But and then I was involved in social justice clubs, and that brought me more towards the issues of the Latinx community. And I went to UC Riverside in Southern California, so there was a lot of engagement with migrant cultures in the area, and issues that were important to those groups. And so I got to engage with more of the broader issues of the Latinx community through the social justice activism work that I did. And also I worked in an elementary school in college through AmeriCorps. And so I got to come face to face with all of these issues with the education system in Southern California specifically, but also the U.S. more broadly. So, those are probably the three main things that I engaged with that like touched on those different identities, I guess.
Yeah. Now that you've had time to think about it as an adult, were there points of internal struggle, and maybe more now as you're further along in your journey, of where you're like, oh, I should be, studying, or learning more about this culture or learning more about that culture? Are there internal struggles within you that you faced along your way that either maybe bring up a little guilt or other feelings of going one way or the other with your exploration of your backgrounds?
I think I feel it currently with the type of research that I'm doing. I think that I get to do this fun, exciting, NASA related planetary science, fundamental exploration of the universe kind of research, which is great. But what is the immediate human impacts of this research? And I think that there's a big part of me that would like to switch to doing research that has more direct human impacts. And that's something that I'm actively thinking about for myself and trying to engage with the communities that I identify with in my professional space, not only my personal life. And I think I've always felt like, as we talked about in the beginning, this sense of not quite belonging to either community. And I don't know if this was always the case or it's just more of an open conversation now, but there are a lot of people talking about being multi-ethnic, multiracial, biracial, and that seems to be like a new space. But before I came into this space, well, I guess I was always in this space, but before I started having these conversations, I definitely just felt the pull of being back and forth between one or the other and not quite fitting into either mold, right? And so there's been that struggle constantly throughout my life. And if I went and I did the birthright trip to Israel in my early 20s, and that was a really great opportunity, but I was like, I'm not Jewish, right? So should I have been given this opportunity? Whatever, and the part of it is that they want to convert you. So, there's different motivations there. I took a trip to Mexico and Central America by myself and really wanted to engage with the cultures there and the archaeology there and the history there. And so I've been trying to find those things for myself, but definitely just always bouncing back and forth between them. And it's great now that there's this, middle ground where we can hang out and talk about, not fitting into any other space. But that struggle has always been there.
Yes. What do you feel is the superpowers it's given you, though? Because I hear that you've you've done a lot of different things, and obviously teetering or living in between two different cultures or multiple different cultures has given you, psychologists might call them survival survival tactics. But what sort of superpowers do you feel has you have, having been raised in a multicultural household, that you embrace now in your work and in your life?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think adaptability for sure, compassion, curiosity. I think those are the three things that come to mind immediately. I think it's also a way to relate to more people. I think that the more I talk to people and the more I hear people's stories, people experience these feelings one way or another, even if they grew up in a household where their parents came from the same racial or ethnic background. They don't fit in another aspect of their life. And so just talking to people and learning more about those things, you see how much we actually have in common, even if it's not related to our ethnic or racial identities. But I think that adaptability and curiosity, because I've seen how people look at me and have questioned me and my identities or ignored my identities, and I really wished that they were curious about them rather than trying to suppress them or trying to put me into one category or another. And so that's fostered this curiosity in me. Like, I want to learn more about other people and like give them the space that they want to take up.
And what advice, I guess, or what suggestions might you give to parents, or even if a teenager or someone happens to be listening? I asked a previous guest this about exploration, about being curious. Like, what are some ways that you found throughout this journey? You could say, here are, I read this book, or I went to the library, or and package almost a gift basket of, like, here are some things you can do if you are mixed race, if you are curious at all, here's some things you can do, and you should go do it,
Oh, it's such a hard question, but a very important question. I think that we're at a really wonderful time with technology and like social media, and I actually don't really like social media that much, but I think it does open up a lot of space for conversations about these kinds of things. And I think that asking questions is a really important part of all of this. And there are so many like resources, like podcasts, for example, are a great opportunity to hear other people's stories and hear how it relates to your story. And there's a lot of great fiction and nonfiction literature out there that you can read that can also educate you about these things, and you can see where you land in relation to them. And film and music, I think music is a really important thing for me in a way that I've explored my culture, and I think predominantly the Latin American side of my culture. But I think that music is a really great way to understand feelings that are hard to express. I don't know. This is a hard question.
What about community too?
Yeah, community is really important. And I think that like finding people that you can feel comfortable around, and people who allow you to just be who you are and express yourselves in whatever ways feel the best for you, that's really important. And that is kind of hard to find, I would say. And it's something that you actively have to seek out. I think when I was younger, going to university or through jobs, you build connections with people, and they're a little bit more organic, or like, you all start school at the same time. And as I've gotten older and started jobs where, I start on a random Tuesday in the middle of October or something like that, like it's harder to foster those kinds of, that sense of belonging. So you have to really seek it out, and you have to go up to someone and ask them to have lunch with you, or like join a group that maybe it's a cultural heritage group. Maybe there's like a reading group that's focused on certain topics that you find interesting, or maybe there's a sport that you like doing, and then through that sport you'll meet people who share your identities. And I think just being open to having conversations, but also actively seeking them out, is something that I've found is a really important aspect of building community.
This is going to be a tough question. I don't think I had it on the list, but in seeking out, there is a fear that humans have of, just of rejection. And obviously just being from, you've talked about it a lot, about not fitting in. Along your journey, when you've been either on one side or the other, and of your cultures, and somebody has said something like, maybe, for instance, you're not Mexican enough, or if somebody says something about Jewish people, can you remember times along as you were growing up, and maybe even older, as you're an adult now, more clearly, those instances when, microaggressions happen? And I think that's one thing now, looking back as an adult, it's like, I did in some ways react in the only way I knew how back then. But like, how did you react, and what can you pass on to others, whether they're struggling on the in-between right now, and they're like, oh, but if I say something or I bring something up, like, it's going to turn these people off or those people off?
Yeah, that is a hard question, but it's something I've thought about a lot. And I think we've all experienced microaggressions like a lot in our lives, I would say, and maybe haven't realized all the times we've experienced them. And it does feel very isolating when people say, you're not enough this, you're not enough that. And I think as I've grown up and grown into these identities more, it's easy for me to see that that's not a reflection of me and my identities, but it's a reflection of that person and where they're at with their understanding. And it's not that I think they're not coming from bad intentions most of the time, but it's just they're looking at the world through their viewpoints and their experiences, which are different than mine. And an example of this that came up a couple of years ago was that I was talking to a friend of a friend's partner, and she's Mexican. And she was like, oh, so where's your family from? And I was like, oh, my mom's family's from Sonora, like northern Mexico. And she was like, isn't that like on the border though? And I was like, I mean, it's a northern state. It's close to the border, right? And then I was like, well, where's your family from? And she was like, oh, like my dad's from Tijuana. And I thought, like, isn't that on the border? But like, I'm sure there was something going on there that was her just trying to understand, like, she probably saw that or didn't perceive me as being Mexican enough in her eyes. And like, I'm only half, right? So I am not the same as her, but I think it was really a reflection of her understanding and where she was at rather than me not being enough. And that's an easy thing for me to say in this moment now where I'm not in that back and forth interaction.
Sure. Yeah. There's a lot of emotion usually wrapped up in that, or just sometimes shame, like, I've carried shame for, a long time, one way or the other. And I don't think people understand that unless you've lived,
Absolutely. And when you don't speak the language well, people point that out to you really often. And oftentimes I think we might want to lean on that side. Like, if I spoke the language better, then people would accept me more, maybe, or something, and that's a big thing in the Latinx community, I think. So yeah, it's definitely a lot of shame and a lot of like, I don't belong. Where do I belong? And
Yeah. Because you're not only balancing. It's like if I was identified as 100% white, more than likely there's very few instances when people are going to be like, "Oh, you're not a white guy," versus like if you're Jewish or Mexican, like you're getting it from both sides. You're getting it from family. You're getting it from society. So it's really complex. Yeah, and I appreciate what you said, which is so important. And it's definitely going to be much harder for the younger generations, younger than us, to, teenagers and elementary kids to understand that it's the other person's lack of understanding. And if parents are listening, one thing they could do is expose their children to multiple cultures and make sure that, because that's usually where the ignorance comes, is where there's not an understanding of something. And we as mixed race individuals have to learn about a lot, that, like you said, which was beautifully put, that it's the other person, and there might or might not be an opportunity, depending on how emotionally, charged you are at the time, or if there's an opportunity to teach.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, that's definitely true. It's harder with family too.
Yeah. Let's turn the corner a little, because it's fascinating. What do you do now? Like, you're an isotope biochemist, is it?
Yeah, I've used a lot of different words for it, but I do a mix of biology, geology, and chemistry. So those are the fields that I kind of fall into.
Yeah, awesome. That's and obviously we talked off camera about the dichotomy of the male. The science is still heavily dominated space, male space. And then to be a Latinx female in this heavily dominated male space, how's it been for you? I'm just going to start with just throw some things out there.
I'll add on to that I'm also 5'2", so I'm a small person.
Okay.
And I did my PhD in the Netherlands, which is the country of very tall people. Yeah. So there was that dynamic there too.
Yeah.
It's definitely been interesting to be in the sciences, being who I am. And I think that I think when I started out, I was just so excited and thankful to have the opportunity to do science, which is a very naive way of looking at it, I think, that I didn't quite appreciate the dynamics as much as I do now. And towards the end of my PhD and in my first postdoc position, I really came face to face with the dynamics of this really white male dominated field that I'm in, and how that can be really prohibiting in a lot of ways. And it's something that I often feel angry about, and it's something that I often feel powerless about. But I'm trying to do my best to just speak up whenever I feel like I should. I think there was a lot of like me just not feeling comfortable talking or asking questions and feeling like I didn't understand a lot of the imposter syndrome. And I have I went to community college. I have a humanities degree, so I don't know as much as the people sitting next to me, and that's not true. I just know different things, right? And so working on understanding that for myself and working on building that confidence in this space is something that's an active area of research or work for me.
Yeah, and representation is, in every space as our culture shifts and changes, is so important as we get more diverse. And so have you found inspiration? Probably it's maybe, is it easier to find inspiration in female scientists versus saying, hey, like finding a Latinx female scientist that is either in the same space or just even in the space at all? So
Yeah.
are there inspirations like that for you that have, maybe, I don't know if they've been able, like maybe people you work with that you've given you the opportunity to, when you're feeling that doubt, they're like, no, keep going,
Yeah, my first postdoc advisor was a female, and she was very encouraging, and I could talk to her about a lot of things, and she also recognized that she didn't understand fully how I'm navigating the world, but could share her experiences being a female who, like, she was maybe one of 2 female faculty members when she started her faculty position. So she's definitely experienced that male-dominated world. And she comes from an academic family, so very different than me in a lot of ways. And she was more aware of the nuances and, like, details of academia in general. So, she has that leg up or whatever you want to call it. But her insight and support was really important and helpful. And you're correct that there are not a lot of, like, Latinx female scientists in my field, and something I've started to look more to is my peers or the people below me, and I take a lot of inspiration from them as well. Like they're going through it in the same way that I have and in a different way than I have, and that also is encouraging, and I can have conversations with them about what they've experienced, and that has actually been probably the main thing that's helped me to get through this and find my footing in this space. But yeah, I also, my master's advisor was a woman, so I was a very successful female scientist, and so that was inspiring to me. I think I never, like, these 2 advisory examples, I never saw myself like in their shoes or anything like that, but it was encouraging to see them be successful.
Yeah. Did you actively seek out female advisors, or did it just happen?
For my master's, it just happened, and in my PhD or in my postdoc, it kind of just happened, but it was also a little intentional. Okay. There were 2 people I wanted to work with, and I was talking to both of them, and I really hoped that the female one would choose me, and it turned out it was a joint project, so I got both of them anyway, but I really, in the end, wanted to be advised by the female advisor rather than the male, so yeah.
Yeah. So I read also in a great interview about you. You enjoy working with children. Obviously, your parents are both teachers. So it's probably not genetic, but it's probably just, I love teachers. They're always awesome. Well, I would say always, but most of them are pretty awesome people, at least early on in their careers. No?
Correct. Yeah.
But so have you been in an instance where you've either been brought in to talk about what you do, or been working with kids and maybe the children ask you what you do, and you say, hey, I'm a scientist, I do this. And it's not more about like, what does that mean? It's more of like, oh, like maybe a young girl recognizes that you're a female and you're a scientist. Has there ever been instances like that where like that has happened?
Yeah, definitely. My cousin is a 3rd grade teacher, and she does science things in her class, and she shows this video that was recorded during my PhD in the Netherlands, and it's in Dutch, but I speak in English, and there are subtitles, and she shows it to her class, and is like, my cousin is a scientist, and one year for Halloween, some of the young girls in her class dressed up as scientists, and that was just like, whenever she told me that, I was like, oh, that's such a great, like, that's so exciting, Yeah. And I volunteered at an elementary school during my first postdoc in California, where we would go and teach science lessons once a week. And so I got to have that engagement directly with students. I think that there was like enthusiasm and excitement for sciences, and students started to realize that they could do that themselves as a career, but I didn't like see that as tangibly as like, kids dressing up as scientists, and they're still young, right? So you had to follow them for longer to see that. But Yeah.
But it plants a seed. I mean, that's the thing, is it plants a seed like that. I can do that, where before there was not a seed planting. So why is why, now do you look at your culture and your background in this journey that you're on and think, okay, this is been the view of science. Things are getting more, I mean, the world is diverse, outside of most things, why is representation, and I wouldn't say specifically for the work that you do per se, but like, why is representation on all its different levels important for, science and the work that you do?
I think it's important because it brings together different experiences and perspectives and unique ways of solving problems. And what we do as scientists every day is solving problems, big and small. And sometimes you have to follow the protocols of the ways that you've solved these problems. But most of the time, coming up with a new way of doing something is actually what gets you further. And if we focus in on just one narrow aspect of society, of our planet, then we're really discounting a lot of those unique solutions that come up and actually drive the field of science further in our understanding of our world and worlds beyond, right? And I think that for me, that's a really huge part of why representation is important, because it just brings together very different perspectives and ways of doing things. And it's a fight sometimes to get those perspectives to be heard and credited and, acknowledged. But it's important. This is something that's come up throughout society where someone has this weird idea, throughout history where someone has this weird idea and everyone's like, that's wrong. Why would you think of it that way? And turns out that person was right, And so taking that and applying it to an even broader scale, I think there's just so many things that would advance our understanding that would come out of these very diverse perspectives.
So something I've been asking every guest is what's your recipe for world peace?
It's such a good and difficult question, right? As you know.
Yeah.
I think something that's come up throughout this whole conversation is understanding and conversations, talking about things. And I think that you hear this a lot from, people are like, well, maybe I don't like this group of people, but I have this one friend who belongs to that group who I really like, and what is the reason that you like that specific person? So just thinking about that deeper understanding of people on an individual level, I think it's really easy for us to give blanket statements about one group or another group. And part of that is understanding, but part of that is also suppressing understanding and curiosity. And so you think you know something about someone, you prejudge them, you discriminate against them. You're not really open to learning that you actually have a lot of things in common, right? And I think we really forget that. And we live in isolation in a lot of ways, even though we are so connected through the internet, through social media and things like that. Sorry.
Oh, no.
My cats.
No.
We are so connected, but still live very isolated lives. And so conversations are really an important part. And I know it's a small thing, but I think they go a really long way. But I mean, world peace just feels like such a big, almost unachievable thing. I don't know. I mean, there's a part of me that wants to believe it's achievable, but we just feel so far away from it, especially today. So I don't know.
And what is one thing you try to do to bring, if we know that each individual is this beacon or this carrier of a small part, because we're all connected, of a bigger world peace, what are some things that you do to nurture world peace?
Talking to people. I think that I am very curious to hear everyone's experiences and sometimes that requires being vulnerable and sharing your experiences first to open up that space. And so that's something that I try to do, is just find a time to have a lunch with a colleague, or go for coffee with somebody, or, talk to the person next to you at the grocery store. God forbid. I hated that when my mom did it, but small things like that, I think, are just ways that it's easy to be driving down the road and someone cuts you off and you get upset and you're like, I hate everyone who drives Honda Civics because of that or whatever.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Just reminding yourself that, you don't know anything about them and maybe they really have to go to the bathroom and that's why they cut you off, because they're trying to get home, maybe there's an emergency or something like that. They had a really terrible day. And so just reminding myself of those things and opening myself up to giving people the benefit of the doubt, I think, is what I'm trying to do.
You sent a cool bio over, and I just want to add, it says you're interested in using information to understand the background signals of our solar system and the way that life on Earth has altered those signals, as well as Earth's water cycle. But how would you be excited or afraid if we made contact with other life, and we either were able to communicate or they just showed up? Like, what would you think if that happened?
I think I'd be a little bit of both. Yeah, I think there's the fear of the unknown, and also there's excitement for the unknown, right? Yeah, and I think, what would that life look like? What would they know that we don't know? What would we know that they don't know? How would that life exist? What would it be made of? Would we be able to communicate? I think there's so many interesting questions that come out of that it is both exciting and terrifying.
Yeah. And are you reading anything right now that is helping you expand on your journey?
I am reading a collection of short stories called The Wandering Earth. It's science fiction. And I've started reading this book by an anthropologist called How Forests Think, or no, I can't remember the name of it, but it's talking about the anthropology of plants and how these, I think something that's maybe going to sound a little bit out there, but plants have been on this earth for longer than humans have, right? And they have ways of communicating and connecting with each other, and there's a lot of really interesting things that we can learn from that. And this book, I think, is talking more about studying those types of connections between the plant world that maybe is similar and or different to the human world.
Yeah, that I think that it nicely sums up. And we didn't get too deep into your love of nature and the other things you like to do in nature, but I think we can definitely learn so much from nature. And the goal too is, all the connectivity between us all, and forests. I mean, they're learning so much about how these trees have these amazing root systems that all talk to each other, and trees have fear and all these other things, so. Right. Yeah. I appreciate you so much. Thank you so much for being just so open and vulnerable and sharing your life. And it's been great to get to know you a little bit better. And yeah, like you, this is exactly, the types of things that I know other multiracial, biracial individuals are curious about. The people we hang out with might never even, that's another thing, is I want to do that for those people that we hang out with that never maybe took time to ask us. Right. But it's also one of those things is where it's cool that people just hung out. We had people that just accepted us for who we are. There was, but it's also, it's interesting because it's like we're dynamic and they see one side of this, and then we go somewhere else and there's this other side of it. So I hope these conversations, every one of them helps me, and then it makes me think even more and more. And I know you as a scientist, you're always thinking and a very curious person. So Gabriella, thank you so much. I don't know if you have anything that you want to promote. I mean, that's also an option. Connect.
Not at the moment.
Do you want people to connect with you, or?
I don't have like a good social media science persona, but maybe someday I will.
Awesome. We'll look out for her. So yeah. Awesome. Thank you, Gabriella.
Thank you so much for opening up this space. Yes. It's been really great to talk, and you pushed me to think about things on a deeper level too, which is wonderful. So I really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for the Multiracialverse podcast. My name is Antonio Fernandez. You can find this podcast on Apple Podcast and Spotify. Huge shout out to my friend Johannes Skoda for mixing and creating the intro music, and DJ Kazam for the track.